Let's talk about one of the most misunderstood and honestly most powerful parts of interacting with AI, the context window. We're going to explore why the very first thing you say in a conversation can have way more control over the final answer than the very last thing you type. You know, it's so easy to get obsessed with crafting that one perfect final instruction, thinking that's the magic bullet. But that's just not how these things think. The hard truth is the quality of your entire conversation history can, and very often does, completely sabotage the quality of your last command. And this isn't some rare one-off bug or a glitch in a specific model. No, this is a fundamental behavior. It's a pattern you see everywhere, like a persistent echo of your first words that just keeps bouncing around through the whole interaction. I mean, you see this constantly in the tech world. A developer gives a super precise final command, but the AI's output is still stuck on some wrong assumption from 20 messages ago. The prompt itself was perfect, but the history, the context, was already contaminated. And it's the exact same pattern in analytics. An analyst feeds in very specific data points, asks for a nuanced summary, and gets back something incredibly generic. The problem wasn't the final ask, it was the vague, fuzzy framing they started with at the top of the chat. So, this all leads to the central question, right? If the final instruction is literally identical, why does the conversation's history cause such a huge difference in the output? Well, the answer is all about how these models actually process information. To really get this, we've got to look under the hood at the system itself. At the heart of it is the context window. You can just think of it as the model's short-term memory. It holds the entire chat, but only up to a certain point. We can actually break down how this memory works into 3 basic rules that are running the show every single time you interact with it. So these are the 3 pillars. First, the overall context is just way more powerful than any single prompt. Second, the beginning of a conversation creates this sticky bias that's really hard to shake off later. And third, where you put information in the sequence can totally change how it's understood. So, for rule 1, the key thing to realize is this. The AI doesn't see a bunch of separate commands. It sees one long, unbroken stream of text, your whole conversation. That means the final output is a product of the entire signal history. Your perfect final prompt, it's just one little signal at the very end of a much longer story. Now, rule 2 is where it gets really interesting, because it basically mirrors something from human psychology called the primacy effect. Those first few prompts you use, they act like these super powerful anchors. They set the frame, they define the scope, they lock in the core assumptions. And every single thing you say after that gets interpreted through that initial frame. If you start out vague, it is incredibly difficult to get precise later on. And this perfectly illustrates rule 3. Look at this. It's not just what you say, it's when you say it. On the left, the main goal, generate an email, comes first. On the right, the constraint, the word count, comes first. Just by reordering the same exact pieces of information, you change how the model spreads its attention. You change what it prioritizes, and that leads to a totally different result. So, what's the real cost of getting this wrong? The best way to think about it is like a kind of compounding debt. A tiny misalignment at the start of a conversation doesn't just stay tiny. It grows, it snowballs, corrupting every single response after it. And it leads to a massive amount of wasted time and energy. I bet these symptoms sound painfully familiar, right? Getting stuck in those endless loops of reprompting, blaming the model for mistakes when it's really a context problem, getting these weak, shallow summaries when you need a deep analysis. It all just adds up to wasted hours and a whole lot of frustration.
And here's the bottom line, the big takeaway. When an AI interaction goes off the rails, it's almost never a sudden crash. It's the logical endpoint of all these small, accumulated misalignments between what you wanted and the conversation you actually built. And if you had to put an illustrative number on it just to get a feel for the scale of this, you could say that a huge chunk of output errors, maybe something like 80%, aren't because of that final frustrating prompt. They can be traced all the way back to the framing and assumptions you set up in the first few turns of the conversation.
Okay, so how do the pros avoid this trap? What's the edge that lets them get these amazing results consistently? It's not a list of secret words or some magic template. It's about a totally different mental model. They're not just writing prompts. They are actively managing the conversation's state. This here really breaks it down. The amateur approach, the prompt-focused mindset, is always just thinking, what should I type next? But the expert, the state-focused user, is constantly asking a different question. Okay, based on everything we've talked about so far, what's the current state of this conversation? Is it still clean? Is it still pointing toward my goal? They're managing the whole system, not just the next turn.
And that right there, that's the whole game. The real advantage doesn't come from a bag of tricks. It comes from a deeper structural understanding of how the system thinks over time. It's about being a system strategist, not just a wordsmith. So to bring this all home, let's turn the lens on ourselves. I want to leave you with 3 sharp, maybe even a little confronting, questions to ask about your own process, based on everything we've just covered.
First, go back and look at your last frustrating conversation. What were the foundational assumptions you made in those first 1 or 2 prompts that might still be invisibly steering the ship even now?
And second, are you actually in the driver's seat here? Are you actively managing the context, pruning it, clarifying, keeping it on track? Or are you just letting it pile up randomly and hoping for the best?
And finally, here's a little experiment you can run yourself. Take that perfect final prompt that gave you a garbage result. Now open a brand new chat window, a totally clean slate, and just paste that exact same prompt in. What happens? I guarantee the answer will tell you everything you need to know about the hidden power of the context window.